After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," Peter replied. "You know I love you." "Feed my lambs," Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord," Peter said. "You know I love you." "Then take care of my sheep," Jesus said. A third time he asked him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt that Jesus asked the question a third time. He said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Then feed my sheep." Now Jesus had a side conversation with Peter. They actually had some stuff to work through. Right before Jesus was killed, Peter had denied him, after claiming to be the person who would be the most loyal to him, to love him the most. Peter had been scared when Jesus was arrested and was on trial. And Peter knew it would be dangerous to be associated with Jesus, so he lied 3 times and said that he didn't know him. He knew it was wrong. He knew that Jesus knew that he did it. Perhaps you've been in this kind of situation. You're good friends with someone and you mess something up. Maybe you say or do something mean in a moment of anger. Maybe betray them somehow or gossip, whatever. You didn't mean to wreck the friendship. You're afraid you did. And you know you need to talk with them about it, but you're dreading having the conversation because you don't know where you stand with them. Do they still consider you their friend? Will they cut you off or ghost you? But Jesus takes the initiative in this difficult conversation. "Peter," he says, "do you still claim to love me more than anyone else does?" "Oof. You know I love you," Peter replies. As if that wasn't awkward enough, Jesus repeats the question 2 more times. And all Peter can do is give the same answer, repeating that he loves Jesus. But Jesus wasn't trying to make Peter uncomfortable by repeating the question. He was giving Peter a chance for a do-over. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. Now Peter gets to affirm his love for Jesus 3 times. It's actually kind of beautiful that Jesus gives him this chance. But Jesus also gives him something really important in this conversation. Every time Peter repeats his love for Jesus, Jesus tells Peter to feed his sheep. He's not just restoring his relationship with Peter and making sure Peter knew that they were all good now. He's giving Peter his calling, a calling Peter would have for the rest of his life. Jesus was calling Peter to be a pastor. So sheep is a term for God's people, and pasture comes from a word that means shepherd. Peter was to care for God's people like a good shepherd. So we started out this chapter with Peter going back to his old thing of fishing. Now Jesus is giving Peter a new thing that will define the rest of his life. And God does that sometimes. He will likely do it for you at some point. He's not going to call everyone to be pastors, thank goodness, but he has something, or maybe several things throughout your life that he will call you to. Be ready and listening for that. The conversation continues to get interesting. Let's finish out the chapter. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked, Jesus said. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, "Follow me." Jesus goes on to give Peter a cryptic message about the future, that other people will force him to dress and go where he doesn't want to go. Jesus is telling Peter that he will be a martyr. They will end up dying for his faith in Jesus. So honestly, I've spent this whole week wondering about this twist in the conversation. It's a rare thing that God ever gives us a glimpse of our own future, and for good reason. How is this helpful? If you had something horrible in your future, would you want to know about it years in advance? How is that a good thing? I think I finally have an idea, though. Maybe the point of the message is less about the future, though it certainly is about the future, more about Peter himself. Remember, Jesus had called Peter to a big job just then. He's like the church's first pastor. We see him taking leadership about one page later in the Bible in Acts chapter 1. And as often happens in the Bible and in life, when God calls us to something, we look at ourselves and can't imagine living up to the task. We see this oftentimes in the Bible with prophets or national leaders like judges, and all the way back to Moses. People God has called don't feel worthy of that call. Well, and the thing is, God always calls us to more than we can do on our own, because he doesn't want us to do it on our own, but with his presence and power, like we saw last week with the Great Commission. But so here's Peter standing before Jesus, and maybe all he can see is his recent failure. Before Jesus was arrested, he'd straight up told Jesus that even if everyone else would abandon him, Peter would fight and die for Jesus. But that's not what had happened. Peter had run away scared and denied that he even knew Jesus. I think that Peter was wondering if that moment defined him. Did he wonder, will I just do it again? Will I wimp out again when things get tough? It's as if Jesus made this definitive answer to that question in Peter's heart and was saying, no, Peter, you won't deny me again. In fact, you will die not denying me. Peter's past failure would not become a pattern in his future.